A while back, I was riding on the Christchurch Trams during a lunch break, enjoying my travels along the route in tram number 15. It had been over 5 years since I had last ridden on a tram, and it had truly changed a lot since I was younger. I've usually taken photos of the trams, but riding on them brought back those memories. I was talking with an older passenger who had been a driver on the old network, having quite a nice chat with him about the old days of the Christchurch tram. I'd investigate further, using resources from Christchurch City Libraries, discovering that there was a major history to Christchurch, often overlooked by the major history books. I quite enjoy riding on the modern day heritage trams, but finding out that there were trams that rode on roads that I commute on daily to get to school and work is just so surreal. I've compiled a history of the Christchurch tramways here, going in year order from the creation way back in the 1850s to present day. I hope you enjoy this video. Tramways as a concept existed many years ago, almost at the same time as the creation of the steam engine itself back in 1804. Tramways allowed for trains of goods to move through city centres covered with side plate panels so as not to run over livestock and/or people. Tramways were effective at this, as back in those days trucks and lorries didn't exist, so it was either a tram that could haul 100 tonnes, or a horse and cart that can maybe haul 5 or 10, so the answer was very obvious to see here. Trams were also seen as a way for people to commute around towns and cities, seeing as a faster and far less dirty mode of transport compared with the horse. In 1855, Christchurch was expanding, but not as great as other towns like Wellington or Auckland. This was due to the fact that people could only reach Christchurch by a long multi-week trek from either Dunedin or Picton, as rail hadn't been introduced to New Zealand as a whole at that point in time. The only other way to reach Christchurch was to dock at Lyttelton Harbour and make the trek across the Bridle Path, a long and excruciating effort for early settlers. Rail in New Zealand would have a few rocky starts, as in 1855, a rail link was proposed to take goods to the town of Sumner, and then ship it by boat just into the harbour, as Sumner had a deeper draught than the rest of Christchurch, allowing for larger boats to dock there. This proposal was shut down, and nothing more was said of it, but would this be the end for rail in New Zealand? Well, thankfully not. In 1863, the first officially recorded rail line was built on a roughly 1 kilometre section from the small settlements of Ferrymead to Heathcote, just on the outsides of Christchurch itself. The rail gauge was the standard gauge used in the UK, being 1435mm. So rail as a concept expanded across New Zealand, with rail access to Christchurch from Ferrymead being established in 1867. In 1867 also, a rail tunnel would finally be built from Christchurch to Lyttelton, being bored by hand and tools under the Port Hills. With the opening of the tunnel, settlers no longer needed to traverse the Bridle Path, instead being able to take the train directly to the centre of Christchurch. With the tunnel's opening, expansion of Christchurch greatly increased, but soon a problem arose. The town was too big to cross by foot in a single day, making goods sellers lose profit in some areas of the town. So in 1878, under the Tramway Law of 1872, the Christchurch Tramway Company would form. They would spend the next 2 years negotiating with landowners to be able to lay down the first stretch of track of the newly envisaged tramway. The first tram to operate in Christchurch was recorded on the 9th of March 1880, travelling from Cathedral Square down Colombo Street and terminating at the Christchurch railway station, which in those days is approximately 500 metres south of its current day location. The trams operated on that same 1435mm rail gauge, while the main New Zealand rail network operated on a narrow 1067mm gauge, as it was cheaper to build tunnels and bridges narrower, saving money and resources. Many other lines followed, expanding down High Street, Manchester Street, to Papanui Rail Station, the Agricultural Showgrounds, and Devon Street. These lines were built and operated in 1880. More lines were built, notably the Sumner Line in 1888. The lines of the Canterbury Tramway Company were operated by either a mix of 8 steam engines from Kitson & Son or by horse and carriage. New companies intending to earn a slice of the pie began to pop up, notably the Corporation Line, the New Brighton Tramway Line, and the City and Suburban Company Line. The Corporation Line would open in 1886, and the New Brighton Line would open in 1887. The City and Suburban Line would be the last to join this frenzy, opening in approximately 1894. All these 4 tram companies operated different lines for different goods services, but it was beginning to get a bit out of control. The first company to file for bankruptcy was the Canterbury Tramway Company in 1893, eventually being sold and rebranded into the Christchurch Tramway Company. How original. When renewals or grants to continue operating the individual lines began to crop up in the 1890s, the municipal government of the time saw an opportunity. The Christchurch Tramway Board would be founded in late 1902, intending to purchase the private tram companies and make them more public. The Christchurch Tramway Board would fully acquire all the tram lines, converting them to a more fashionable electric system found in Sydney and Europe, starting in 1905. As the story goes, the opening day had 7 electric trams powered by a DC circuit depart Christchurch bound for Papanui, but 2 of them would crash together, resulting in only 5 trams making it to the opening ceremony. By 1906, all the available rail lines were converted to 600-volt DC circuits powering these new electric trams. The heyday of the Christchurch tram had arrived, with up to 27 electric trams, 7 steam trams, and approximately 42 carriages operating at its peak. The number isn't exact, but that is what is known. This number grew to have 65 electric trams by 1912, and an additional purchase of 34 carriages by 1920. By 1922, the network would expand to the point of having over 86 kilometres of track, making Christchurch Tramways the largest in New Zealand and the second largest behind Sydney in the Australasia region. By 1926, patterns began to show that the regions close to the tram lines began to expand more and more, allowing the small settlements of the time to begin to connect together, with infrastructure and roading coming as a result. As the size of the network expanded, so too did the number of staff employed by the Christchurch Tramway Board, notably reaching 530 staff in 1920, making it the largest employer in Christchurch at the time. But as it reached the peak, soon the beginning of the end began to occur. The Great Depression in the 1930s hit the trams hard, as with increasing road and bicycle traffic as well as loans that had not been repaid, they struggled. During the 1930s, some of the tramlines began to close, some of them being the North Beach Line and the tramline north of Papanui towards Redwood. World War II would have some benefits to the Christchurch tram, as with wartime restrictions on gas and fuel, people began to take the tram once again. Rookham Aerodrome, the NZ Air Force Base of Christchurch, was some of the main customers riding on the trams. But the finances were somewhat slim, resulting in some of the male drivers effectively being fired to go serve within either war or other businesses, with female drivers being brought on, as under legality of that time, women could be paid far less. Oh, how far we've come since then. Don't search up New Zealand pay equity. Up to 28 female tram drivers operated the Christchurch trams during the World War II. But this minor success during World War II would be undone by what would happen to the many other tramways around the world: public transport. The Christchurch Tramway Board saw the efficiency of being able to run both buses and trams at the same time, as the trams would continue to pay off their own debt, while the buses earned profit for the board. In 1950, 39 diesel buses were purchased, soon spelling the end for the tramways. Soon, one by one, the tramway companies began to close over the course of 1950 to 1953. All but one were torn up and relaid with roads. The Papanui to Kashmir line had been the most profitable of all the tram lines, but soon, in 1954, it would close to make way for the buses. On the 10th of September 1954, the last passenger-earning tram would run from Kashmir to Papanui, returning to Cathedral Square where symbolic ribbon cutting was undertaken, and with that, the buses became the main mode of public transport in Christchurch. But trams in Christchurch wouldn't go extinct, as in 1964, the Tramway Historical Society would form, acquiring some of the old Christchurch trams. In 1967, the Tramway Historical Society built a purpose-built line and sheds at the Ferrymead Heritage Park, which opened in 1968. The line would first be built to a 1435mm rail gauge, with the first tram to operate at Ferrymead being the Kitson & Son No. 7 steam tram. A steam tram with the number 7? Haven't heard of it. In 1984, this tramline would extend through the Heritage Park, eventually creating a loop line that would be electrified and allowing for both steam and electric trams to operate on the Heritage Tramway. In the 1990s, requests from the Tramway Historical Society, a route was proposed in the central city, solely designed to be for tourist traffic. So in 1995, a basic line was opened, slowly expanding over the years, creating a complete loop for trams to travel on. These trams were leased from the Tramway Historical Society for periods of time, being on rotational timetables. In 2005, this new Christchurch Tramway was purchased by the Wood Scenic Line Limited, becoming the official owners of this new tourist line. Various trams were directly purchased from the Tramway Historical Society, becoming official residents of the tramway. Facilities and workshops were set up with a base of operations at Cathedral Junction. In 2011, an event would happen that would affect Christchurch severely. On the 22nd of February 2011, at approximately 12:51, an unforeseen fault line near Littleton would erupt, causing a 6.3 magnitude earthquake. Because the depth was shallow and at a relatively close distance to the centre city, the results would speak for themselves. I luckily wasn't in the central city. I was getting groceries at my local supermarket, but many people were less lucky. Buildings fell, many more were damaged, and the final death toll would reach 185. Christchurch tramways would close for a few years following the earthquakes as plenty of rubble and debris had strewn across the central city. Construction had previously been started on a new loop line, but this was put on hold as repairs were prioritised. The tramway would open again in November of 2013, operating from New Regent Street to Worcester Boulevard and back, operating 2 trains shuttling back and forth, making use of the passing loop at Cathedral Square. The trams had minor upgrades to allow for catenary lines that powered the trams to be able to swivel back and forth, so the lines wouldn't bend in a backwards position. In November 2014, the original loop was reopened, allowing for the trams to travel in one direction once again. In February 2015, the new line was opened, extending down Cashel and High Street, terminating at the High Street and Litchfield Street intersection. It was here that the swivelling catenary lines came back into effect, allowing the trams to travel back up to Cathedral Square. In 2022, the Christchurch Tramway would finally extend across this intersection, creating one final loop, making the final length of this tram line 4.5 kilometres long. In February 2023, there was a minor derailment of tram 152 would close this line until July, when the line would reopen once again. It is unknown what the cause of this derailment is, but the leading theory was that the corner was too tight for the wheel flanges, causing them to jump the tracks. This corner has since been re-gauged. And to my knowledge, there has never been another accident on the tramway at the time of recording. There have been plans for a smaller loop to Barbados Street down Ferry Road, but nothing has been confirmed as of recording. While we are here somewhat on the subject of tram numbers, let's talk about the official fleet. There are what I like to call the three red ones, 2 green, 2 blue, and the brown one, totaling 8. You'll see what I mean in just a moment. I don't have specific dates upon when some of these trams arrived on the tramway, but I do have the build dates. Number 11, the oldest tram in the fleet, was the first ever tram to be restored by the Tramway Historical Society. The tram resembles a closed shape and designed to trams found in San Francisco. It is a nice light red paint scheme with quite a bit of wood exposed. Number 11 was built in 1903 in the USA, being part of a batch of 14 solely for Dunedin. It's such a scrunkly little thing, look at it, its wheelbase is smaller than the LNER Y7 that Chris Eden Green covered on that one episode of Slips. You should go watch that, by the way, it's a pretty good video. Number 152, built in Christchurch itself, was to the Boone class design, having a dipped lower section that was exposed to the elements, with enclosed sections at either end, intending to be used in all types of weather. It is a nice green and cream colour scheme. 152 was built in 1910 in Christchurch, being a part of 28 identical trams. Number 24, built in Christchurch as well, also follows this Boone class type, however it's slightly different, as the back half of the tram is exposed. It shares the same colour scheme, the only difference is the length of the tram as it is slightly longer. 24 was built in 1920 and it is unknown how many of this specific type was built. Number 15 is the smallest tram in the fleet, which was from Invercargill originally, being refitted slightly for the Christchurch tramway. It has a brown livery that I think just suits its tiny little nature. 15 was built in 1921 in the USA, being one in over 6,000 produced worldwide. It's so boxy, it's adorable. Number 178, arguably the most famous Christchurch tram, as it is the most heavily featured in the promotional advertising, and rightfully so, is beautiful. The red paint scheme gives it a really official look that I really love. 178 was built in 1922 in Christchurch. to unknown specifications. Melbourne W22, number 244, a sister tram to 411, doesn't have much history to it, the archives being incomplete, but it is known that it was restored at the Tramway Historical Society. It has a maroon colour scheme, not my personal favourite, but it still looks nice. 244 was built in 1925 in a batch of 406 in Melbourne. Melbourne W22, number 411, a sister tram to 244, was modified into becoming the famous tramway restaurant, carrying passengers around the full circuit at night while the passengers eat tram-cooked and prepared food. It is a dark blue livery which looks stunning at night. 411 was built in 1927 in a batch of 406 in Melbourne. The meals may be overpriced, but it is good. I might actually try it someday. The final tram is 1888, otherwise known as 1888, the most recent addition to this fleet and the largest of the trams. It has a rather nice looking cyan livery, being my second favourite of all the trams, behind 178. Or 1888 was built in 1934 in a batch of 195 in Sydney. With roadworks continuing to happen across Christchurch, reports of rails beneath the roads are ever so increasing. Recently, in 2024, the road near my university was being torn up so new pipes could be installed. Those steel rails, probably having been laid around 120 years ago, finally saw the light of day. And yes, I did take this piece of rail to keep it home. It weighed over 35 kgs, and yes, it did hurt to get it home. Hi there, I recorded this a week ago and two things have happened since then, so I'm gonna put them here. 1888 was taken back to Ferrymead for an overhaul, and the other thing was that 178 hit a car exiting the Christchurch Art Gallery, colliding with the tram and crushing it against a lamppost. On a typical running day, there are usually between 3 to 5 trams running during the day, but when a cruise ship arrives in Littleton, sometimes there may be all 8, even including the tramway restaurant with the kitchen obviously closed. A complete tour of the tram network navigates 18 stops, becoming a sort of guiding tour, taking roughly 50 minutes. Probably the best way to travel around Christchurch's central city. I heavily recommend it. You might just learn something new about Christchurch. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This has been a bit of an experimental one to gauge the demand for content like this. If you liked it, you could subscribe, like, share, comment, do the things that YouTube tells you to do. I do have another video planned to release within 2 weeks from now about a well-known tunnel in New Zealand, so here's your sneak peek for now. For now, this is TWMallard38 signing off for now. Have a good one, folks. Goodbye.